Jewish leader, activist, innovator, and social entrepreneur defines Dr. Harriette Wimms. With her passion and dedication, she inspires us all to build sacred communities so that everyone has a place at the table. Dr. Harriette Wimms is a licensed clinical psychologist and founder and executive director of the Jews of Color Mishpacha Project and a driving force behind the Baltimore JOC, Community Havurah. She is also an adjunct faculty member at the Academy of Jewish Religion in Yonkers and serves on boards of directors for numerous local and national Jewish organizations. Dr. Harriette Wimms was recently hired by the Associate Jewish Federation of Baltimore as its inaugural Jews of Color Engagement Fellow. We now welcome Dr. Harriette Wimms as she presents We Are the Tree, the Importance of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusive Justice.
Hi all. Thank you so much, Ellen. Thank you so much, Margaret, for all of the behind the scenes work that they have been doing to help this continuing education program come to pass. And I am so very grateful to be able to be with you all this evening. I've put a couple of resources in the chat. We won't be going to them yet. I do ask that if anyone else might be able to help me out, if new people join, they won't see these links. So I'm going to put them in right now at 7:38 my time. And if someone else joins the Zoom, if you could please drop those links again, that would be wonderful. I also, as we move along, I welcome any questions as we go through, and you can just go ahead and raise your hand on the screen or wave your hand in the room. Let me know that someone has a question, or you can also raise your hand using the reactions button. There's a raise hand function at the bottom of your screen that way. And I don't mind stopping along the way to answer any questions. It's my understanding that we have until 9 o'clock tonight. Is that correct, Ellen? Great. And so I'm going to talk with you for about 55, 60 or so minutes. I know it's late in the evening. I know that some folks just had dessert. So, so I'll try to keep this lively, and I'll also give us a little break if it looks like folks are starting to need a little break. And above all, take care of your bodies. If you need to get up and get water or run to the loo or anything like that, please do that because you are all sacred beings, because we are all made in the image of the divine. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and start our program for this evening. Let's see here. I need to start from slideshow. Okay. Stop. All right. Is everyone able to see that?
We are the tree. Yes.
All right. So we are the tree, the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusivity, justice in Jewish spaces. I learned many years ago the quotation, "She is a tree of life," and she being the Torah. She is the tree of life, and all who cling to her will be happy. And it really blew my mind. Like, wait a minute. Actually, it says the gender she, it says she in Torah, and absolutely, it is a gendered statement. And since that time, I've also been learning a lot about trees. I've been learning about the ways that communities of trees communicate with each other through the roots. I've learned that communities of trees, if there's a tree that's sick, the other trees that are feeling healthy will actually send nutrients to the sick tree so that that tree can heal. And it made me start to think that In what ways do we, as humans in community, what lessons do we have to learn from the trees about a community of many different types and varieties, and yet among the trees, they take care of each other, regardless of difference. And how can we do that? So tonight, we're going to kind of develop we're going to develop some shared understandings of terms like diversity, equity, justice, inclusion, and belonging. We're going to talk about pathways to inclusivity. We're going to lift up and celebrate our own diversities. And then I want us to take some time for you all, for your shul and your communities, think about some collaborative skills developments. What do you want to see manifest in your community in terms of belonging? And then we'll share out and we'll talk about next steps. And so to start, I have an assignment for you all. I'd either like you to share in the room or share in the Zoom. I learned this great term recently, roomies or zoomies. So if you're a roomie, share around the table. If you're a zoomie, think about it and post it in the chat. And 1 or 2 words, what does inclusive mean to you? And in 1 or 2 words, what does diversity mean to you? Inclusive and diversity. And I'll give you a few moments to go ahead and think about that.
Well, one kind of refers to the other, I would think. If you have diversity, you want to being inclusive means including a diverse audience. That's kind of the definition in my mind.
I think they're a little different. I think inclusive means sort of welcoming to strangers. Diversity has to do with the strangers.
That everybody's different.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Inclusive is an open group.
Yeah.
I think sometimes people talk about diversity and they're only talking about the color of a person's skin or their nationality, but they don't talk about their ideas. For example, do we want someone who's in favor of Benjamin Netanyahu in here or Donald Trump? If we're diverse, we should welcome all different viewpoints. But a lot of people who espouse diversity only want one particular viewpoint. And that's what annoys me about people who espouse this inclusiveness and diversity, is it's only for their own purpose.
Okay, thank you. And then I'm going to ask you, and then I'm going to stop sharing so that I can see what's in the chat. Roomies and zoomies, on a scale of 1 meaning not at all, or 5 meaning fully, how inclusive and just are your Jewish communities?
I would say around at least 4.
4+.
4+.
4 or 5.
I think it depends on the community.
Aha.
This one is a 5.
This one is very inclusive.
So I've heard some beautiful things already. Let me take a look at the chat. Okay, so inclusive, everyone is welcome, no one is excluded. Of and for everyone, acceptance of difference of backgrounds. Diversity means all the different ways we are different, difference of every kind, any kind. And in the Zoom, I have a 4, and I think we're talking about your temple, your shul, 3.5 to 4. And you can just speak of TBE, okay. So I heard some beautiful statements. We're talking about the stranger when we think about diversity, but in what way is a person a stranger? And then I heard that sometimes when we think about diversity, we're only thinking about the color of a person's skin. And what about a diversity of ideas or a diversity of identities? When I talk to my students, we talk about identity factors. And we'll get to this in just a second, but it's much more than just the color of someone's skin or where they were born. It's their values, it's their thoughts, it's their dress, it's their speech, it's their culture. We're all right here quite diverse. And those who I can see, however, all to me seem to be what I would say white presenting. And I can be wrong. Last night we had an amazing Jews of Color, JOCISM, Jews of Color, Indigenous, Sephardic, and Mizrahi Passover Seder. Oh my gosh. The first one that I've done for the Baltimore Jewish Federation. Amazing. And so there were people who were coming in who looked to be Black and brown, coming along with their partners. And then there were two people who walked in who seemed to be white presenting. And a person at the front desk said, "So please tell me what brings you here?" And the response was, "We are Jews from Libya. We are Sephardic." They were perhaps white presenting, but even in our assessment of that diversity, we were absolutely, well, I wasn't, but I'm going to say we, collectively, we were absolutely wrong. I also love, and I'm going to try not to go off on a lot of tangents. My caffeine has worn off at this point, so we may just be up for a really bumpy, wild ride this evening because I may become very tangential. But I also love that thought that we have to have a diversity of ideas, that from the conservative, from the Republican, to the Democratic, to the liberal, to the unaffiliated, from the Orthodox to the Reconstructionist and everything in between. I don't know exactly who said that. You're absolutely right. Diversity is, in fact, diverse, and not just the diverse that makes us comfortable, because we can't be happy checking off boxes. Oh, yes, a gay walked in the room. Okay, check. Oh, okay, and now a Black person walked in the room. Check. I was in a different meeting this afternoon. I've been on Zoom all day, and for an organization called the Jewish Social Justice Roundtable. And it was a group of about 20 people. And we're learning about how to use conflict as a mechanism for change. And everyone in the room seemed to identify as either female or gender nonconforming. There was one male identified person. And when it was his turn to share, he said, "I don't know if only women seem to be interested in organizational change and conflict, but I'm the only man here and it sure feels uncomfortable." He said it tongue in cheek, but maybe he was feeling uncomfortable. And so, hurrah for the person who said a multitude of ideas, and hurrah for the person who said it's more than just the color of our skin. Or diversity of mental health. Florence. Where is Florence? Florence, can you tell us a little bit more about this? I love this idea.
Well, I just know that people who might be struggling, sometimes it's uncomfortable for other people, or maybe people on the spectrum who want to get involved, but it's uncomfortable for other people.
I love that you brought that up. My first client today, I was fidgeting and futzing and I couldn't get myself settled. And I said, I know I'm a little bit autistic. And my beautiful client who I've been working with for 6 years said, a little bit. And from that client, I absolutely took it as a compliment. Yes, we have different ways of interacting. We have different needs, different accommodation needs. And how do we build a tent that can accept all people across those differences? So we're going to come back actually to mental health. I am going to start to reshare my screen. But I do want to note that you all told me that you feel that your congregation is quite inclusive, and that's beautiful to hear. Okay, trying to get my computer to participate. Okay, so for the sake of time, I'm just going to ask a couple of folks to tell me, what does belonging mean to you? I'm going to ask Ellen first because I've gotten to know Ellen incredibly well.
Belonging, belonging to me feels like we're sharing I'm in an environment where the people are open to share views and viewpoints and listen to ideas, even if they're not exactly what their ideas, and opening our ideas open to a discussion. It opens up to a discussion.
I love it. And someone who's on the Zoom, what does belonging mean to you?
It can mean the opposite, actually, because very often when people think of belonging, they're part of a tribe.
Mm-hmm.
And they are opposite of inclusive because they grew up in a particular culture and it's very hard for them to separate from that background.
I love that you said that. I think I wish we had 2 hours. I would have caffeinated in the evening for 2 hours tonight. I love what you just said. And I will tell you, here's the beauty of diverse thought. When you said tribe, I immediately thought of my chosen tribe, the people who have come to love and support me, either as a Jewish person of color, as a Jewish person, as a queer person, as an academic, and that's quite different from my tribe of my biological family, where since my parents have both been gone, I don't fit in. And so isn't it interesting that tribe can mean inclusive on one side and exclusive on the other? What a wonderful work. We will come back to that as well. So we've been thinking about belonging. We've been talking about inclusion. We've been talking about diversity. I'm going to show you a few images. We don't have to comment on them, but I just want you to think about what I show you. And even think about the idea of, in the context of Judaism, what do these images mean to you? Anybody missing here?
We're all like people.
Anybody missing here? So, what is Jewish equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging? The Jewish Federations of North America use the term Jedi Jewish equity, diversity, and inclusion. And I love that because it's also, of course, a reference to Star Wars and, to the Force. And I like to think also about belonging, because sometimes when we can have an eye toward these other aspects, we're able to facilitate belonging. So a little bit of shared meaning for us to, again, build a similar context together. JFNA's Jedi team has developed commandments of belonging. And I won't read all of this text. However, I will send you the slides afterward, and you'll be able to explore further. So the commandments are telling our story of positive self-image, building a world on charity, kindness, and righteousness, thinking about legacy and tradition, ongoing growth mindset journey, the day is short and the work is plentiful, holding paradox and ambiguity, we won't always have an answer to our question, mutual empathy, empowerment and encouragement, allyship, faith and security, and shattering stereotypes. That if we're able to consider that in our shuls, in our communities, in our programs, in our hopes, in our board, in our hiring, in our rituals, that belonging, that we will get closer and closer to belonging. And why does it matter? Well, the research tells us that Judaism is in a difficult place, that more than 40% of people, young people who are asked about, who have identified as Jewish or have Jewish parents, 35 to 40% of them say that they do not identify as Jewish and they do not feel a particular link to Judaism. In part because, and this was stunning to me, many people born Jewish do not feel that they know enough to participate in Judaism. I don't know why. I don't know why that makes me want to cry every time I think about it. And it blew me away to learn it, because as a Jew by choice, who I love and live my Judaism all day from morning to night, I just was so shocked to learn that some people for whom this is a legacy by birth feel out of place. Maybe that's why belonging matters so much to me. Also, belonging can support continued engagement across the lifespan, increase a sense of safety, increase social emotional functioning, also support the spiritual pipeline. Judaism is also changing because our populations are changing and are becoming more diverse. And that does not just mean the color of skin, but also ideology. And in order to be able to have a Judaism that meets a diverse population, we have to have a diverse clergy. And I've had a lot of conversations with rabbinical schools lately in building out a clergy of color and training communication network. And our cantorial and rabbinical schools don't have a lot of diversity. Rabbi Sandra Lawson became a rabbi 7 years ago. And she was the first Reconstructionist rabbi to be ordained who was out as being queer and a woman and Black and in a marriage with a person who was not Jewish. That was just 6 or 7 years ago, friends. Wow. And that's the Reconstructionist movement, which some see as being very, what's the word I want to use? Flexible. And yet she was the first. And then also, welcoming the guest is greater than meeting the face of the divine. That when we are able to create spaces for diverse people, that it is a mitzvah higher than communicating and meeting the face of the divine. So diversity is difference across identity factors. It's more than race. The Rumi who said it's more than race, I wonder, did you see my slides ahead of time, or are we just on the same wavelength? And diversity is a range. Oh, I'm sorry. Is someone trying to speak? Okay. Diversity is the range of human differences, including but not limited to race, ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, age, social class, abilities or attributes, religious or ethical values, national origin, or political beliefs. And the JF&A Jedi Work Group says we don't control how diverse humanity is, but we do control we do control how inclusive we are of our diverse humanity. That the entire tradition is built around curiosity, nuance, and arguments for the sake of heaven. And that multiple identities, dual identities, is what the Bible archetypes represent in diversity. I think often about Noah and his wife Naamah. And we know that Noah gathered 2 of every species of animal onto the ark so as to ensure diversity in the new world that was to be created. However, his wife, it is said, went about the work of gathering every single type of flower, plant, tree, grass, so that the world, the new world, could also have a diversity of plant beings. That suggests to me that when that new world was created and when God showed us the rainbow as the covenant, indicating that this would be the world that we would have, that it would not be destroyed again, that world was built on the foundation that diversity matters. So inclusion, what is that? Inclusion is diversity that is fully valued and engaged. It's what happens when when diversity and love come together. We often also hear the words equality and equity thrown around. Equity means that we are able to have tools that identify and address inequality. That's equity. Instead of, the problem would be is if both of these people, in terms of plucking the apples from the tree, had the same size ladder, well, it would be equal, but it definitely would not be equitable. That's equality. This is equity. And why today? Because our communities are becoming more diverse, because we have to wonder, is it time to adapt, or what is that, the rest of that sentence, adapt or what? Say it a little louder. Perish. Adapt or perish, God forbid. Divisions between groups continues to lead to some devastation, and the idea, if not now, then when. Also, Jedi is important in Jewish space because we all are made B'Tselem Elohim in the image of God. And so that diversity is actually something that the divine perhaps wanted for all of us. The divine image is also one of diversity, and this diversity is sacred. It is said, anyone who destroys a life is considered by Scripture to have destroyed the world, and anyone who saves a life, it is as if they have saved an entire world. I have a dear friend who provides medical care for the LGBTQ community. And I say to her whenever I talk to her, so you saved someone's life today. And they say, why do you say that? And I tell her often, because you listened to someone speaking about mental health. You validated a person's experience today, and you may be the only one who did it. And as a parent of a gender diverse child, I know for a fact that people who embrace me and her in their communities and help us belong save her life. Also, from Mishnah Sanhedrin, we read, the Holy One, blessed be God, strikes every human from the first human, and yet no person is quite like their friend. Therefore, every person must say, for my sake the world was created. Oops. Okay. So I'm going to tell you, look at my time. I'm going to tell you a little bit about me. And I also will ask that I'm going to leave you with homework at the end to follow up on this continuing education program and really take some time to think about what would a plan for supporting your continued equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging, what would it look like? You all identify yourselves at a 4 to a 5, which is beautiful. And I don't know if every person who came to visit would also say a 4 or a 5. And if they do, I'm sending everybody to you all. You really do need to have a continuing education program. And there might also be some people who might not fit in. So, who am I? Why am I here? When I was 6 years old, we lived in a small town in southern Maryland, so-called southern Maryland because it was on the western side of Maryland, and it sided with the South during the Civil War in terms of wanting to maintain slavery. And my mother was born in 1923 in Valdosta, Georgia. Her father died when she was around 7 or 8. Her mother died when she was 12. Her mother died soon after complications. A KKK mob wanted to lynch her for being uppity. She begged for her life in front of her children. Her children begged for her life. And so she was just severely beaten instead of lynched. And my dad was born in 1907 in Washington, D.C. I have since learned that his mother came from North Carolina. He fought in World War II. And then when he came home, he did not get to access the GI Bill. Many people of color, soldiers of color, did not get to access that bill. he went on to work for Lockheed Martin. It was just Lockheed back then. And he used to travel across the United States and visit aircraft, aircraft divisions, because he had become an aircraft electrician. And he would tell me horrible stories, especially the ones where his Black colleagues would be driving across the country at night and they would be pulled over and never seen or heard from again. So I was raised in this small town where I learned, for example, if you are walking past a white person on the street, you lower your eyes. And when I was 6, and I don't know why, except I was always like this to my poor mother, my long-suffering mother, I went to my mother and I said, Mommy, I do not believe in traditional religion anymore. At that point, we were attending a Christian Science church. And I don't know if it was because I was a sickly kid and we weren't supposed to use medicine. And I don't know if it had something to do with something that happened in religious school, me being teased for being the fat kid. I don't know what it was, but whatever it was, I realized that I had to have a very mature argument for why I didn't want to go back to church and Sunday school anymore. I said, so I'm not going to church with you anymore, I said. First thing she said was, get thee behind me, Satan. I think she was thinking, what the heck kind of mashigana blah, 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 blah is this? And then the next thing she said to me was, you and your father are always at that library, so you better get yourselves to that library and you better find yourself a religion. And for years, I knew the exact call numbers for exploring world religions. Maybe it started with 2. I don't know. I don't remember it anymore, but I would go just every week, several times a week, to that section and explore religions. And when I was about 8 or 9, there were 2 that stood out to me as interesting. One was Wicca, because I loved thinking about the trees and the moon. Oh my gosh, I used to love when we would drive in the car at nighttime and the moon would follow me. You know, I thought, she's just looking down at me. And the other one was Judaism. Now, I decided I could not study Wicca because the book also said that I had to dance naked under a full moon in the backyard. I was already in hot water with my mother, so I knew that that wasn't going to fly. And in St. Mary's County in Southern Maryland, in the late 60s, early 70s, there were no synagogues. There was no access for me to Jewish people. And so I went through my childhood. When I was 16 or so, I told my parents that racism was an antiquated idea and that racism and hate no longer existed. And as I traverse this world, this Jewish world, and this world outside of Judaism that is filled with so much goodness, so much bliss and joy and belonging, I also know that I was wrong and that hatred still exists. And I do so wish that I had an opportunity to go back to my parents and say, I'm so sorry. That was my teenage mental illness. When one is a teenager, they know everything. And anyone who's, older than 18 knows absolutely nothing. I have an 18-year-old now, and I trust you. In her eyes, I am just like as dumb as a rock. Um, I do wish I could go back and tell them both and that the world is beautiful and that the world was made for all of us and that we are still needing to fight for belonging and justice. So I continued to search spiritually for years and years and years, and I even spent a long time studying Wicca and studying the feminine divine because I felt like I needed to find a God that looked like me, that was black and round and disabled and in love with humans. And I was able to find deities that looked like that by studying African traditions and Dianic traditions. But Hashem, as they say, Hashem has jokes, because in that group, there were two women, a mother and a daughter, who were Jewish. And as I studied more and more and learned more and more in this group, they brought in more and more aspects of Judaism. I came to learn about Shekinah. I came to learn about Judaism being a moon-based religion in terms of, timeline and holidays. And I loved it. I loved learning Hebrew words. About 13, 14 years ago, I met a friend who was very dear to me, a Jewish man. And I remember one night we were talking, and I said, I've always wanted to be Jewish, but I know I'm not allowed to be. And he said, well, why? I said, because I'm black. I'll never forget it. It's a memory that I can't shake. He laughed because he thought I was making a joke. And then he realized that I wasn't joking. And he said, Judaism is not white. And he took me to his shul. And here we were, him, his two daughters, blonde and blue-eyed, me and my then son. And we were my son and I were the two people of color that I could identify. We know that that's not a good way of assessing, but that I could identify in that room. Hundreds of people were there. And my daughter started reading at the age of 1. She literally was deciphering words at 1. I remember I went to her preschool, this little co-op, and I said, Miss Karen, Holly is reading. And she said, oh, that's so sweet. All parents think their children are reading, but they really aren't. They're just memorizing. And at that moment, Holly came up to the two of us and she put the cap of some toy in my hand and she said, Play-Doh. And I looked at it and sure enough, it said Play-Doh. I'm hearing impaired. I'm deaf in my left ear. And so all television we watched with subtitles. And I do actually believe that helped facilitate her reading. Anyway, so she's 7 and we're sitting at the back. Maybe she's 6. We're sitting in the back. And she's reading the Siddur. And she's riveted. Because she's seeing the Hebrew and she's seeing the English. And she's just, it was like she had opened up this treasure trove. And a woman comes up to us. I will say that my friend's daughters also were looking at the Siddur. But she comes over to us only and says, you need to be very careful with that book. That's a sacred book. And so I told Holly to put the book down. Again, as the divine would have it, that next week when I told my therapist, my then therapist, about this experience, and I was just so heartbroken, she said, "What shul was it?" And I told her. She said, "I am a member at that shul. I'm going to tell the rabbi that that happened." And a few days later, with your permission, of course, she said, and a few days later, the rabbi, my beloved rabbi, Debbie Wexler, reached out to me in an email and said, "I heard what happened. I'd like to apologize. And would you please come in and meet with me?" And when I met with her, I told her, I don't know why, but I've always felt like I was Jewish. And she said to me, "Do you know that there is a belief that all people with Jewish souls were at the base of Mount Sinai? And so if you feel like you have a Jewish soul, you probably do." I began meeting with her. I converted. I went on to have my adult bat mitzvah with her as the teacher. And then I studied in the graduate bat mitzvah course. And I wanted to do more than sit in the pew. I wanted to be some kind of leader. And she said, "You don't want to go to rabbinical school." And I then found my way to Kohenet, where I could learn to be a Jewish clergy person, focused on get this, the divine feminine and the divinity of nature, the divinity of the trees and the oceans and the skies and the wind. What I can tell you is that after I did my work around conversion, about 4 years I worked within a conservative shul. And then I visited the mikveh. I had my Beit Din. I visited the mikveh. And Rabbi asked me, "Would you like an aliyah?" I didn't know what that was. I said, "Sure." So Saturday morning, I come to the shul. And then, oh my goodness gracious, this woman comes down to greet me, and she's bringing me up on the bima. And I'm terrified. After I say the prayer that my rabbi guides me in, all of a sudden, the whole room starts singing this song at me. Mazel tov and simmer tov, and I'm like wanting to shrink in under the floor. I didn't know what the words were. I didn't know why they were doing it. I didn't know what I was supposed to do. Never seen anything like this before. And I got flustered. And so after they were done singing, I walked out and to get some air in the hallway. And a woman, a white identified woman who seemed to be in maybe her early 90s or so, said, "Oh, are you so-and-so's nurse?" And I'd like to say that that was the only time that someone asked me a question like that in that shul. Because I was asked, was I the nurse for other people? Did I know that we needed more toilet paper in the bathroom? Could I take the coats? Did I work in the kitchen? When COVID happened, I had just started to build community with other Jewish people of color. And then we were all in our homes. And I went to social media and I typed in a query, anybody interested in getting together who's Jewish person of color and maybe having some kind of retreat online. And all of a sudden, Jewish people of color and their beloveds from across the country were emailing me and texting me and writing me back on Facebook saying, yes, please, let's do that. And then another person said, you should apply for a grant. And another person said, I will help you write your grant. And all of a sudden, by mistake, I had started a not-for-profit organization. By mistake, the Jews of Color Mishpachah Project. And we build community for Jewish people of color and their beloveds. Also, I was lucky enough in June of last year to become the first ever in any Jewish Federation system Jews of Color Engagement Fellow. And I'm on a listening tour right now, talking to Jewish people of color and asking them, what have been your experiences in Jewish space? And what I want to tell you all is that every single Jewish person of color that I talk to, who can be identified as a person of color, has a story just like mine. Are you here to work? We need the bathroom cleaned up. Can you move those tables? Oh, you're in the wrong place. Do you know where you are? And then when a Jewish person of color says, no, I am here for services, for an event, then they are often asked questions like, tell me how you're Jewish. I want to know your story. Or, when did you convert? And a number of Jews of color are actually Jewish by birth. So, what I believe, what is my lens? I think that I'm here, right? I know that I am but dirt and ashes, and the world was made for me. That means that I believe that Judaism and most movements and spiritual paths have to have an open door policy for everyone. I believe that as Jews, we seek to welcome the stranger because we were strangers too. I also know that converts are to be uplifted. I know that we are called to love our neighbors as ourselves. I know, as a person who has been on the outside, that building tribe and feeling a sense of belonging saves lives. And I know that community and relationship are created at the speed of trust. And that the idea of Jewish equity and diversity and inclusion and belonging, they are realistic, they're not just aspirational, and that they are built on the foundation of relationship and dialogue. So, one thing that I'm going to do is to move to, I'm going to stop sharing for a moment and see if there are any questions in the chat. Okay, great. Before I move us to our text study, knowing that we are at 8:30, any questions, any thoughts, any feelings, any feedback?
I was wondering, you say diversity would have to include everyone, but why would you want to include people that are haters, basically?
I love that question. And as a psychologist, it is one that I grapple with often. So I'm going to tell you my answers. First, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Musar practice, and then I'm going to tell you my answer. Are you familiar with Musar?
No,
So Musar is a Jewish practice of ethics based on several midot, or I guess we could call them mindsets: truth, faith, honesty, humility, intention. And this way of being came about at the same time that Kabbalah was coming about, around the 10th, 11th, 12th century. And it was the idea that we as human beings need to be constantly working on becoming our highest selves. And David Jaffe created a program called Iowa. I'm going to put it in the chat. Inside Out, Wisdom and Action. And sorry for my capitalization. I was also an English major, so that's why that makes me crazy that I did that. And he recently, about a year ago, hired a gentleman named Yehuda Webster, who used to work for Jews United for Racial and Economic Justice. And David Jaffe and Yehuda developed an Iowa program called DRIO, Dismantling Racism
Yep.
from the Inside Out. Okay. For me, I believe that even if I don't agree with someone, I have to figure out how to show that person compassion while protecting myself. I remember once I was listening to NPR, and there was a person who had been a member of the KKK, and he had realized that he did not want to live his life in hatred. And what he was doing was going back into white supremacist organizations and preaching love. I remember thinking, well, good for him, because that ain't me. I'm not good. I can't do it. I can't do it. In studying Musar within this DRIO program, I am to look at every ethical stance from 4 perspectives. How does this support my relationship with self? How does this support my relationship with my fellow, the person who's in tribe with me? How does this support my relationship with the divine? And lastly, how does this support my relationship with the opponent? In other words, with the hater. And when I took that class the first time, I said, Yehuda, I can't care about the hater. They don't care about me. The second time around, it hit me. This is an answer for me. If I am going to preach love and belonging, then I have to at least be able to listen to the perspective of my opponent. I don't have to agree, and I definitely don't have to subscribe to it. But I wonder what would happen, because I do think that systems like hate come from brokenness. And I believe that compassion and belonging can heal brokenness. There may be people in this room who love Donald Trump. I think he's mentally ill. There may be people in this room who also love Kanye West. I also think he's mentally ill. There was a piece that I contributed to in the foreword, and I said, I think he is mentally ill. Kanye West is mentally ill. And I got emails saying, I think he's a musical genius. I don't agree with you. And that's okay. But I have compassion for them because in my perspective, there's brokenness there. That's how we can make space for the hater. My dear mother thought I was going to hell. We fought my entire childhood about religion. I can't imagine what she would be thinking, knowing now that I'm clergy, that I read the Bible constantly, that I am constantly thinking about spirituality. So I would have been a hater from my mom's perspective. And I do so wonder what she would think right now. Before we go to text study, or before I send it to you, questions, thoughts, feedback. Ellen.
How would you address, I mean, in your role as a Jewish communal leader, even the lack of there's a wide diversity within the Jewish religion itself, and the divisiveness among our own? It's a tough question. I know, broad.
It's a beautiful question, actually, that I love.
Disturbing.
And it's disturbing and it's beautiful. One of the things that I found in creating community for Jewish people of color is that there are those same stark differences, denominations, observance levels. And there was a study called Beyond the Count that was conducted by an organization called the Jews of Color Initiative. And a couple of things that study found was that 80% of Jewish people of color experience discrimination in larger Jewish institutions, and that Jewish people of color also seem to be incredibly devout about their Judaism. In my listening tour with Jewish people of color, I have also found that Jewish people of color seem to have to participate in something that I'm calling the Jewish Olympics. That they have to be able to daven and daven very well. They have to be able to learn Torah and do it very well. They have to show that they are observant in whatever the denomination or observance level is. Because there's also this questioning of, do they belong? At all of the gatherings that I have created, I focus on pluralism. And I focus on some of the basic tenets, like, if we save one person, it is as if we have saved the whole world. And that belonging matters. There was a moment at our last in-person Shabbaton when we were doing Havdalah. And we had an Orthodox rabbi. We had a rabbi from the conservative movement, an Orthodox male rabbi, a female Hazon, and from the Hazan from the conservative movement. We had a Reform person, leader, rabbi, and we had a Reconstructionist rabbi, all doing Havdalah together. In peace. I think that's how it happens. I think it happens one connection, one story, one conversation, one service, one friendship at a time, until we are able to build tribes where no person has to believe that their difference is better, just different. That's how I think we get to a pluralistic society. And I have to say that somewhere deep inside of me, or not so deep, is that same kid who believed that racism no longer existed. I now know it exists. I now know that there are so many ways that we are divided as humankind. But I still have hope.
That's what defines your beautiful soul.
Thank you, Ellen.
Any other questions or comments?
Thoughts? You're all so quiet.
I know. We're a mellow group. You mellowed us.
Uh-oh.
We're deep in spiritual thought.
Well, I do have a question. It's Florence.
Hi, Florence.
I just kind of think we are all very welcoming within our community, but I don't know, people can tell me what they think. Don't you think if we were truly inclusive, we would have a more diverse congregation? I don't know. That's just what I'm thinking. I mean, I think maybe we have to make more of an effort.
It's a good point. No?
You know, I'm going to, I don't want to, Florence, I can't speak to that, of course, because I'm not a member of your shul. But what I do want to make sure I share with you all are these identity pillars, increasing representation of underrepresented groups. These pillars that have been identified by the JFNA JEDI team. And they include race and ethnicity, LGBTQ plus people, Jewish religious affiliation. This speaks right to Ellen's point that those who are from multiple affiliations being included, including those who identify as just Jewish.
On the FSA 57 battery trimmer.
Gender.
Please mute. Please mute. Go ahead.
When babies
and
die at a church school, it is time for
move?
us
Is that
beyond.
Can we please mute? If you have a TV on, it's interrupting our program.
Of the words of the British statesman Edmund Burke.
Ellen, can you mute everybody?
So gender, and realizing that that includes people who are identified as male, female, transgender, or non-binary, people with disabilities, visible and invisible. As a person with ADHD, dyslexia, and hearing impairment, many people miss my disabilities. And it is a beautiful thing when accommodations are made available without me having to ask. Multi-faith families, non-English speaking natives, age, and this is a problem across the span. Judaism can focus, and Jewish institutions can focus so much on babies and families with young children that people who are without children, people whose children have flown, and they are empty nesters, so to speak, and elders, there's often a challenge of supports being available to those people who have varying life experiences, people who are experiencing economic and financial vulnerability, people who have mental health and physical health struggles, and then the 11th, which I think is my favorite, the ones that we don't know, that there are identities that aren't listed here that can interconnect with other identities around being underrepresented. So Florence, I think that that's a truly brave question that you lifted up. And I think it's important to also continue to think about, in what ways do we want to be belonging, or do we want to increase belonging among underrepresented groups? With that in mind, I want to say that I think maybe one of the next steps could be having some talking sessions around some of these questions. What creates a sense of belonging within Jewish institutions? How might you create a sense of belonging in your community such that individuals can embrace a lifetime of Jewish inquiry and belonging, not one that ends when they have their bar mitzvah, but one that continues? What aspects of diversity and belonging are present within your communities? And what do you need to create Jewish inclusion, diversity, equity, and belonging across contexts? Also consider, from this thought place, what practices you would put into place. What would be your next steps toward building inclusive Jewish spaces? What will be the step after that? And how can we all work together to create ecologically diverse equity, belonging, and inclusive justice? Some of the suggested steps from JEDI include evaluation, education, and engagement. It's also very important to continue to, and you will see this in the text study that I put in, or the text that I put in the chat that you can also review afterwards. Consider checking assumptions. Assumptions happen. Bias happens. It's how the human brain works. We put things in categories. We learned when we were young, oh, okay, anything that has 4 legs, that's a dog. And then once we figured out everything that had 4 legs was a dog, then a parent said to us, oh no, honey, that's not a dog, that's a horse. Oh, okay, so now this is a horse. And you had to put it in a different category, and different categories, and different categories. And then it becomes hardwired, those assumptions. We have biases. It's better to think about them and to be honest about having them than to pretend that we don't. Remember that the convert is holy in Judaism, but also not to assume that every person who has a diversity factor is a convert. And remember then that not every stranger is a convert. We also have to figure out how to take space. Speak up, especially if you are someone who tends to be more quiet. Take space. And if you find that, I love this idea from the Jewish Social Roundtable, the Jewish Justice Roundtable. If you have shared, let 4 people speak before you share again. Take space and then make space. And that as Jews, we do not authenticate others. I want to tell you a story before I take more questions. The weekend before last, so 9 days ago, I was in the South. I was in Atlanta, and then I was in Alabama on Reconstructing Judaism's reckoning pilgrimage, civil rights pilgrimage to the South. There, with 200 other people, among them about 14 or 15 Jewish people of color, I visited for the first time ever the lynching memorial. I visited the Legacy Museum created by the Equal Justice Initiative, Barry Stevenson. I invite you to check that out afterward. And it is a museum that chronicles the African slave trade, the kidnapping of 10 million Africans to bring to North and South America after the indigenous people had been decimated, and then traces that all the way through to mass incarceration in the present. I visited the Rosa Parks Museum. I met with a woman who 3 times walked across the bridge with Martin Luther King into Selma. Twice, she and her younger sister and many other children were beaten by the police and then placed in cells as babies, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And we ended our pilgrimage at Ebenezer Baptist Church, which was Martin Luther King Jr.'s church, where the current pastor is in kindred with the rabbi of a nearby shul, so much so that members of the temple sing in the gospel choir. I mean, gosh, Ellen, if that can happen, surely Jews across observance levels can come together. My God. And the rabbi actually gave the sermon from the pulpit about belonging. We're about to celebrate Passover, the Exodus from being enslaved to freedom. Civil rights activist Fannie Mae Hammer said, "Nobody is free until we're all free." I believe we get free by making communities of belonging. I lift up that your community sounds like an amazing one. And I send you just the biggest blessings on your work. And the work will continue because there are people who are seeking shuls who feel like they're alone, who feel like the world is filled with haters, or who are filled with hate themselves. I just heard Bob Marley in my head, because we know that only love can conquer hate. I wish you a beautiful Passover, Chag Pesach Sameach. And again, any other questions, thoughts as we move to closure?
I'd like to give hold on. I'm losing, okay. I'd like to thank you, Harriette, for opening up this beautiful dialogue about diversity, embracing a lifelong commitment to Judaism, and keeping in our mind these communities of belonging, because it's so important. I also want to give a shout out to my friends Edie and Stu, who gave the recommendation to you because they have a family member in Baltimore who heard you in their congregation. So thank you, Edie and Stu, because it was a beautiful evening. Any other questions or thoughts? One more?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that perhaps I'm the only Baltimore girl in this lovely
There you are.
meeting. I grew up in Baltimore. My family always belonged to Sister Muna. I got married there. You know, so those are my roots. I know that that the Orthodox community has become extremely strong, and many more because of people leaving New York because of housing is so much cheaper in Baltimore versus the New York area. I disagree with you that you sort of painted Baltimore as not a southern city in its ethos, you know, compared to St. Mary's, but it was extremely segregated as I grew up, very much so. You know, the Jews were linked to the Black community as those of us being not acceptable to live in certain areas. You know, so that, you know, that was always, I felt that, you know, very much so when my parents were looking for a new house to move from, we lived off of, not Richardson Road, I'm trying to think. We think of it as Rue de la Choules. You know what I'm trying to say, Park Heights Avenue, you know, and my parents were looking where to move, and there were many areas in Baltimore where basically the gentleman's agreement was no Jews or dogs allowed. I don't think it's nearly that way anymore. The train station even was very segregated with separate entrances and restrooms, you know, for those who were not white. You know, Baltimore has a very sorry history in that respect. You know, and that's always stayed with me. I think that things are different in New York, thankfully, and hopefully Baltimore has evolved. You know, we don't go there much anymore, but anyway, I just thought that might make you feel even more at home with us because we have this Baltimore connection.
Thank you so much. We just recently had a program at the Associated called Changing the Conversation, and it was focused on Blacks and Jews in Baltimore. We brought in 2 professors from Georgetown University who wrote a book called Blacks and Jews in America. One of the challenging things that came up in that conversation is that it is true, and it wasn't just a gentleman's agreement, Beth Gay, it was actually law, that neighborhoods like Guilford, Homeland, Rogers Forge, which bumps right up against Mount Washington where I live, which is one of the so-called Jewish neighborhoods in Baltimore, that Jewish people, Blacks, Latinx people could not buy homes in those neighborhoods. And what also came out during that conversation is that a number of Black communities felt that the Jewish community, the white Jewish community, left them and fled to the suburbs, to Pikesville. And then the infrastructure died in Baltimore. There's also an amazing book called The Black Butterfly that talks about what happened when Baltimore City communities just shriveled because of the lack of economic support. I don't know that I am painting Baltimore as paradise. But what I am saying is I've seen hope.
Good. That's very reassuring.
Thank you so much for sharing. Rebecca, did you have a question? No. Yes, I see you. Your hand's up.
I had a question about two words really, that seem to be a large part of the problem. Diversity
Can we
and
still mute
social.
ourselves here? We're still answering.
And the two words are good and bad. We all have a tendency when somebody believes something that's very different, we feel that because we're good, they must be bad. And I think that is why it works best when only two individuals are involved and not two groups. Because often in two groups, those feelings, I think, are reinforced in good and bad.
I love that.
When I was a teenager, perhaps, well, before, I guess I was about 12, I was perfectly happy with being Jewish. But as I looked around the world, I said, religion is a big problem because it has good things, but it divides people very badly. And that the more people believe in certain aspects of their religion, the more they fight with each other. And I think within a group, it's exactly the same way.
So, what I will say to that is that I think when we break things into a dichotomy, all or nothing, good or bad, that we find, I tell my little clients when they come in and they say, Mommy always does thus and such. I say, you know what? Human beings they're just too variable. They're all just so different. We can't ever say always and never. So I teach them to say, Mommy almost always takes away my TV for no good reason, right? Almost always. I think when we buy the false idea of dichotomy, we set ourselves up for failure. That there is really so much to be learned by the places in between. And I believe that actually that's where we create belonging. Not that one person has to give up even their ideas that may be extreme to be in relationship with another, but that there's enough trust built that both people can have their ideas and also be in tribe. My girlfriend loves football. I couldn't really care less. But I bring my laptop downstairs when she's watching football games and I get to get my work done while she's hooping and hollering over the TV. Football fan or not football fan is not good or bad. At least I've evolved enough to believe that. And I think there would have been a time in my life would have been like, oh my gosh, wasting so much time on football. But it really is just neither. And if we can find places in between, that's where the magic happens.
It's getting away from good and bad.
Absolutely.
Two opposites always.
Absolutely.
We make such a sharp division ourselves, and we associate the worth of a person with those differences. And it's hard to bridge.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Harriet, for a wonderful evening.